Hello and welcome to the Dissidents Podcast, brought to you by the Institute for Liberal Values. This is where we talk about how we can strive for a world in which freedom and reason are at the forefront of all human society. In this week's podcast, Elizabeth Spivak and Mike Burke will be finishing part 2 of their series on moral identity. Mike and Elizabeth have a heated discussion about an article they both hate, albeit for slightly different reasons. In the end, coming to the conclusion that it shows just how easy it is to gin up group identities, insecurities, and angst, potentially leading to a whole host of horrific outcomes. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. I may sound a little bit husky. I'm kind of recovering from a minor head cold. Could be COVID. Who knows? Who knows these days, right? Considering when I did test positive for COVID, all I had was a runny nose, no headache, no fever, nothing. Okay, so apologies if I sound a bit husky, unless that's the kind of thing you like, in which
I was going to say, I rather like it.
Well, hello there. So let's not linger there for too long. So today we're looking at a social psychology article that got me a bit cross, called #NotAllWhites. Liberal-leaning white Americans racially disidentify and increase support for racial equity. Well, one of the reasons that I got a bit cross is because it doesn't really define liberal. Mm-hmm. It doesn't really define white. Mm-hmm. It doesn't really define disidentify versus non-identify. And it doesn't really identify equity or equality. And in fact, it confuses the two. But let's go ahead.
Okay.
Elizabeth, do you have anything to say?
Well, I guess I will say, I don't want to, I almost said like in the author's defense. I don't know that I mean it that way so much, but of course, I'm in America and you're not. And so I do think some of this Trump stuff, you have maybe maybe I should say like a better perspective than maybe those of us who were closer to it. And so I think some of the things maybe that you object to are, I didn't necessarily even see because I have my own set of biases and assumptions and so you're going to point those out in ways that, I love that you're going to point out my my predilections for to not see, to sort of overlook certain things. So I chose this article. I thought it was sort of a good follow-up to a couple of other podcasts that we've done, like on shame and similar kinds of emotions. And so what these authors are, by the way, do you know how to pronounce, is she Doris Day, basically?
I guess named after the famous film star of yesteryear.
Well, of course it's spelled differently.
Right?
It is DAI. So I don't know, but I rather.
Dai, if she's of Japanese extraction, then Dai would be the kanji that goes like this. It's like a kind of triangle of Latin, which means big.
Okay.
If I say like daisuki, which means I love you or I like you a lot.
Okay.
Or daikirai, I hate you a lot.
Okay.
So it might be big, but I've never met a Japanese person called Dai.
Yeah.
I've had Dai as a nickname.
Well, that's the last name.
So it maybe isn't Japanese. So I guess if I read it, I would say Dai, Doris Dai.
Okay. So it's Dai, Eason, Brady, and Fryberg. And so what they are, their basic hypothesis in all, it's 4 studies they consider, they're doing 1A and 1B, basically is that group image threat would essentially cause liberal leaning white American participants, to contend with the group image threat by disidentifying with their racial group, whites, and signaling supports to supports for ending racism or other egalitarian beliefs. And I did want to talk, because it's the same for almost every study, I did want to mention at some point, we don't have to do it right now, some of their measures. But did you want to, I already knew that you had a few things to say about even their introduction, right? Their, to sort of their background.
Let's just get this out of the way, right? So you are perhaps correct that because I'm maybe a little bit emotionally removed, and I only say you're perhaps correct because British people viscerally hate Trump for all of the same reasons that American people hate Trump. You know, we consume a majority of our media through the internet these days, I guess, and even on TV. Even if we go through the old newspapers and the old TV system, sticking very strictly to British TV channels, there's so much about Trump and how awful he is. Even, you know, even when he's out of the White House. So, you know, it's there in the UK too. However, I think I disliked Trump quite intensely before he became a political figure, before he was hated, in a time in which he was actually widely celebrated and the darling of the media class, when he was the host of The Apprentice and he was going around bullying people and telling them, you're fired. These big, fat American, ostentatious, everything over the top, everything big, all of that kind of thing. That's what English people hate about Americans. And of course, that stereotype is not fair. Does that represent America and Americans? Obviously not. But that's the English stereotype of America. And it's like, when you see something like that, especially as an English person, you really do roll your eyes. But the bullying that went on with it was just really, really unacceptable. And I really disliked him from that point, way before he became a political candidate and way before he was hated in the media.
So, but you don't think that qualifies him, him, I guess him, I say him, but when we talk about the materials, that you don't think that necessarily made it appropriate stimuli for a study? You think that that's essentially, I don't know, a different kind of bias an assumption in the study that they shouldn't have made?
No, they said things about him that weren't true.
Okay.
So there are all kinds of things that you can say about Trump that I've just said some that are
Yeah.
demonstrably true. Another one that probably angered me the most was when he was caught on tape saying, I just grabbed women by the pussy. You know, and boasting about that as if that was somehow something that made him look cool. Like he actually believed that made him look cool. If he didn't believe that, he wouldn't have said it. Now,
Right.
you had people within the Christian right saying, oh, this is just locker room talk. Maybe he never does that. Maybe that's completely right. Maybe it is just locker room talk. That's vile. Like, what kind of person goes around boasting about sexual assault? I mean, it's horrific.
Bullies.
I already had plenty of reason to hate him, and that was even more reason to hate him. You know, you want to talk about things that, you know, Trump lies all of the time, demonstrably. That's another reason to dislike the man intensely. He's a thoroughly dishonest figure, not to mention an egomaniac, a braggart. Well, people say I have the best words. I have the best words, don't I?
Yeah.
That's what they say, and all this kind of stuff. There's nothing. I mean, he has this kind of charisma that resonates with some people. I can see that. Not with me. Like, okay, I mean, where do I stop in reasons to dislike Trump that are true? Another one that the article gets right, in the supplementary materials, albeit not in the article itself, blaming immigration for everything.
Mm-hmm.
Does immigration cause problems? Well, depending upon which set of immigrants you bring in a set of problems that come from the country of the immigrants. But, is immigration on balance a positive or negative thing for America? Definitely positive, in my opinion. Yes, it
Well,
brings in
you were
problems.
talking about not, Japan and other countries not having enough of a workforce, for example, right?
Yeah, it was
And
exactly the point.
yeah, yeah.
So not
And
just
that
Japan.
America doesn't have Japan has had to outsource a lot more, even though we still outsource plenty, but even more aggressively, right? Because there simply isn't the workforce where America does have enough immigrants to keep some of
Right.
those.
So Japan has been facing terminal population collapse since the 1990s, and so what it's done is it's built factories in other countries, and so instead of doing everything in Japan and exporting it to other countries, in which case they might put up tariffs and try to block Japanese exports, um, Japan has gone to those countries and developed industry within those countries, both developing and developed countries, and that makes those countries like Japan, but it also means that Japan can utilize their younger workforces to produce, to begin with, um, products that require lower skilled labor forces. But then as those labor forces improved, Japan then ratchets up um, the the quality of the labor and the quality of product they make. So, for example, Seiko um, would do the watch case would be made in somewhere like China or Malaysia, where there were younger, lower skilled workers. Not true for China anymore. And then the higher skilled, higher paid work done by older workers, like the watch movement itself, would be done in Japan. But now they're making decent movements within Malaysia as well, as they've leveled up that workforce. So this is a really great way to offset your aging population. Also, you invest in automation. Um, and so Japan has kind of succeeded. I mean, it's a serious problem. You look at a country like China, where the demographics are way worse, who have become rich, relatively speaking, to their past, um, by having lots and lots of low skilled, cheap labor. They can't do that anymore because of their population demographics, or they can for the moment, but they can't carry on for much longer. The United States doesn't face that problem because the United States is such an attractive place to live, that it attracts young, poor people. And these young, poor people come in and they cause lots and lots of problems. Irish immigrants
Mm-hmm.
came in and caused lots and lots of problems. Italian immigrants came in and caused lots and lots of problems, both of which forming Irish gangs, in Hell's Kitchen, New York, for example, the mafia with the Italian immigrants, and to an extent, some of those problems even still persist today from those immigrant communities, and yet they're so intrinsically American, and those ethnicities have contributed so much to American life that we would hardly say,
Right.
we should get rid of the Irish or the Americans, although there were plenty of people at the time who did say exactly that and run on that message and got office because of it, right? And so, blaming the immigrants right now because they're causing problems, and they are causing problems, is nothing new. But if you look at, you know, America as a nation of immigrants, it's always been able to solve those problems and integrate those people. And that very much is happening right now with Hispanic people. Um, and a conversation with Wing the other week, if you can go back to the podcast that's already released, in which we look at actually what a triumph African Americans have been and continue to be, in spite of the problems that they currently present. That there's been massive achievements there. So America, to do a Trump and to blame all of the woes on immigrants is something that I agree with the authors on. This is completely ridiculous. This is a strength for America. Of course, there are trade-offs, but there is a strength.
Well,
So
now let's be clear though that the authors, while they're using, um, I mean, I'm going to take issue with I agree with the authors on, because I don't believe that the authors are making a political statement, and I don't, and now maybe they are, like, you took issue, you said that they say a few things that are wrong, but I don't think that the authors are using. I think Trump was a convenient factor in American politics that allowed them to design their materials in this way. But I don't believe that the authors are making a political statement. So,
Well, they said that Trump was anti-egalitarian, right? They said that Trump was
well,
expressing anti-egalitarian beliefs in the article. And
well,
one of the beliefs that where I would agree with them is anti-egalitarian, is an opposition, is blaming things on immigrants to the extent
no,
that
no,
he
no,
has.
no, no, no. So they are manipulating the materials to say that for the participants. Did you say that there's a place in the article? Because I'm totally
Yeah,
focused on the experimental design, of course.
of course, like this is what we do, right? Like
Yeah,
I'm the ideology person. Elizabeth
yeah,
focuses on
yeah.
the design.
So, I mean, I don't want to. I'm
Yeah,
challenging you. I'm not disagreeing with you at
let
this point,
let me
but
pull it up. Maybe I've got it wrong. Let me put it up.
well, okay. I already found a place. Where he says, throughout his present, this is the Pew Research Center. They're citing. It's in the very first paragraph,
Right.
about
Okay.
halfway down. Throughout his presidency, Trump continued to promote anti-egalitarian ideas and policies, separating migrant parents and children and defending white
Okay.
supremacists.
Neither
So
of
now
which he
they are
did.
citing other people in there. They're doing so,
Okay, you can cite it and it's other people, but you are
yeah,
making that case.
right,
And in that
right,
case, they're kind of
yeah,
regurgitating one half truth and another lie.
right, right.
So the
And
half
I'm
truth.
so focused on the experimental materials
This
that
is why we make such a great team.
yeah.
So they're saying he's anti-egalitarian, and then in the supplementary materials they give 3 measures. One of which is we need more policing for inner city cores.
Oh, well, I want to get to that. I do want to get to that, but that's a whole, that
I'm
is
not sure that's
definitely,
anti-egalitarian.
there is a place that's, in my opinion, a flaw in their materials.
Okay,
But
so let's get to that later.
let me just, so in their manipulation materials, what they did was, and this is similar to other studies that we've talked about, they led participants to believe that, the majority of people like themselves believed in several uh, things. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so now I know that one thing I should mention is that they recruited. These were all Amazon Turk participants, and they recruited them. Only whites, and they had to be. They could not be biracial. They could not be Hispanic. Now, you do that in Amazon Turk. When people sign up, they describe themselves. Okay, so I'm not saying that people can't, mistake. So they, not when they're signing up for that particular study. Okay, but when they're signing up for Amazon Turk, they fill out some information about themselves. So maybe their income and that kind of stuff. So I'm not saying that people never, that there aren't some people in here that maybe don't belong. But
for example, a lot of American Hispanic people within a couple of generations just see themselves as white.
oh yes, that's what I'm saying. But that's what I'm saying that they advertised for. Okay, so they advertised for it. So we can't. This is something that you can't know, and you can't know that whether you're doing a study in person or whether you're doing a study online. You simply can't. You can't. No.
But it just goes to show how much race is such a social construct, and we're kind of,
right.
It's almost like we're trying to Frankenstein it.
Yeah.
Schultz to bring it back from the dead.
Yeah. So, I mean, an option, of course, would have been to recruit, essentially just recruit all, open the study up to a lot more people and then sort of divide things up. Right. And they're, divide things up by groups. That's not what they did. They recruited whites. Okay. So, throughout the study, then they kept sort of reminding people about whiteness. Okay, so in their materials, they said last month a nonpartisan think tank, did a survey, and here were the results. They gave them 5 results. Percentage of white Americans who feel that President Trump's views accurately reflect their own beliefs and concerns. And so they did either 66% disagree or 66% agree. Okay. Percentage of white Americans who agree who agree with President Trump that many people on welfare are taking advantage of the government and wasting taxpayer dollars. Either 69% disagree or 69% agree.
What does many mean? What does many mean?
The percentage of white Americans who agree with President Trump that inner city Black and Latino neighborhoods are dangerous and poor, so they need law in order to help protect them. 60% agree or disagree. So depending on the condition. Okay.
So is this an anti-egalitarian belief? Because that's what they seem to be framing it as. They don't say it explicitly, right? But that's what they seem to be framing it as. So you have to.
Well, they had to decide. Okay, so I'm going to. I mean, again,
that's an egalitarian
belief. At some point, you have to make a decision about your materials, right? I mean, you can't.
At some point,
yes,
after you've thought about it, maybe.
Yeah. So
can I just?
I'm going to defend them on just in general.
Let's just pause here, right?
Yeah.
Poor communities, whether they're in the United States, whether they are white Appalachian rednecks, or they're inner city Hispanics, Blacks, commit crime at a higher rate than non-poor communities. That's a rule. It's not just a rule in America. Poorer communities are more likely to commit crime, and therefore they require more policing, because most of the people in those poor communies will not commit crime, and they need more protection. And this,
I can't understand though why you object to, because they're presenting this in an effort to manipulate the people in the study. They're not presenting it as fact.
No, but they are framing it as an anti-egalitarian belief. And it is framed as an anti-egalitarian belief.
Yes, they're choosing what they know to be at the time, and probably still, to be politically charged issues that people have heard in the news, have been reading about, that the candidates are talking about, that that kind of thing. So
okay, so later in the article and towards the end, they go through all of these experiments, and then they say, look, this shows that this is all very useful, promoting white, and I have issue with this as well. I have issue with white, and I have an issue with disidentification. That promoting white disidentification is basically useful in fighting racism. And if you mean like you're trying to disparage that it's helpful to get people to disidentify from this idea that inner cities need less policing, that's helpful in fighting racism, that seems to be the logical link that they're making.
Yeah, see, I think
that's outrageous.
Yeah, outrageous. But I disagree that that's what. I don't believe that the authors are suggesting that this article is useful in addressing the topic, the topics of the stimuli material. I don't believe that. They used the stimuli in order to manipulate participants. So when you're doing, like, look, they realized this was going to be a small effect. That's why they have so many people in their study. They pre-registered the study. They looked to see what their power would be, and they have a lot of people in the study. They realized this would likely be a small effect. Okay. And so normally then what you would do when you think when you do a study the first time, you try to make things as different between the two groups as you possibly can. So you want a powerful manipulation. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, maybe they're offending people in this study, right? Maybe you find the materials offensive. That's, or they're not trying to be accurate. They're trying to manipulate the participants. And so, think to believe that other people think this. So it's okay if, in fact, it would be okay if the participants thought this is bullshit. That would be okay with the researchers, because that would mean that their stimuli actually, they were
Sure, but
people. Yeah.
what I don't find is okay is that they associate this, they heavily imply that this is an anti-egalitarian belief. When in fact, if you wanted to get better outcomes within inner cities, as loads of people within the inner cities themselves would say, and a whole load of research within criminology makes very, very clear, they need more policing. That reduces homicide rates.
Yeah.
That
I
produces
just feel
more
like you're
equity.
nitpicking about.
No, I'm not, because
about
the whole thing begins with a set of lies, right? One of which is a half truth. So, were parents separated at their border under Trump? It's true, they were. What they don't mention is that the policy began under Obama.
But it doesn't matter.
No, it does matter, because you're starting off with a lie.
It
and
matters.
Then they say that Trump supported white supremacists. He didn't.
Right.
You get people on TV cutting out the interview.
It matters for their conclusion. I agree. It matters for their conclusion.
You can't start an academic article with lies. I mean, you can if you want to be profoundly dishonest.
Well,
and the fact that you're starting off with a bunch of lies shows that you haven't even bothered to get your ideology in check.
But what you're calling lies, we're not like the part of. I'm only talking about the part of the article that was shown to participants. Okay. The introduction, the conclusion, the discussion was not shown to participants.
Okay.
So I'm not just.
What's the function of the argument? The function of the article is to persuade you that white disidentification, as they define it, is useful in fighting racism. Basically, that seems to be.
That's their conclusion. I have another conclusion. So.
Good. Well, let's go back to let's rewind and go back to. Sorry for getting cross, but like this.
Well, no, I don't disagree with what you're saying.
Sure.
I just think
it doesn't.
I think it's a little bit of a side street. It's a little bit of a turn off.
How can it be a side street when that's the main message? But it's so funny. It so highlights like where our focus is. No, to be clear, just because I don't like the ideological loading, and I really think it's ideologically loaded, it doesn't mean that it does not follow. It would be a non sequitur for me to say that the engine under the hood, the data work, the methodology is bad. I'm not trying to make that case. I'm just trying to say that some of the assumptions that are in this article are wild.
Right.
That's it. Carry on. Sorry.
And I'm not even suggesting that I disagree with you. I just am not sure I agree that it's relevant for the manipulation, but I understand why you think that it is. Anyway, okay, let's see. I think I got to 4 of them. I don't know. Percentage of white Americans who agree with President Trump that affirmative action discriminates against whites. So they did either 74% agree in one condition or 74% disagree in the other. Percentage of white Americans who agree with President Trump that immigrants are responsible for American decline, 67 agree or disagree. Okay, so the point of that was to have exactly the same pie charts, right, for both conditions, but some people would be in the condition where they would find themselves in agreement with most of the, in theory, most of the white people that had been, again, the current authors are saying there was this other study, this fictitious other study that found, and so you would find yourself in the study and maybe say, oh, I'm like everybody, I'm like the majority of the people in that other study, or I'm not like the majority of people in that other study. And so I get your agreement, or I mean, I understand your frustration with whether or not those are egalitarian or not. But the point was to either make you think that you were in agreement with the majority of whites. And also, again, this like white, 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 white. So one of, I think that, you already mentioned, like what is white identity and that kind of thing. And certainly, I mean, that's also
scary.
an issue. It's also an issue in the study.
It's scary, and kind of what the study is doing, I would argue, is replicated all across the media right now, where people seem to be determined to create a white identity, where then, in my view,
well, now they did not. They didn't. They're just reminding people. White again. It's sort of part, and I think that it speaks to your sort of your wonderment about like, well, what is a white identity? I don't know. What is a Black identity? What is a Italian identity? I don't know what any of those are. I don't think the fact that I don't know what it is doesn't mean that people won't conjure something up. And that's a problem with this study and with a lot of studies. You can ask people anything and they'll try to answer it, right? That doesn't mean it's a good question. That doesn't mean it's, they'll do their best. And in particular, something like, Amazon Turk, they want to be good participants, right? And people, and again, especially in Amazon Turk, people can't raise their hand and ask a question, say, I don't understand the question or something like that. They just carry on. And so that's what they're doing here.
But that terrifies me.
But it worked. So they still
I'll tell you why it terrifies me later.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so then they did ask, just so that listeners know what they just asked people what their political ideology was, from extremely conservative to extremely liberal. So a high number, and that becomes important later on, a high number means extremely liberal. So the racial disidentification questions. So this is, they did not make these up. These did come from a scale. So I feel a distance between myself and white Americans as a group. I feel detached from white Americans as a group. I feel loyal to white Americans as a group. That's obviously reverse coded. I'm happy about being a white person in America. Being a white American gives me a bad feeling. I wish I had nothing to do with white Americans. I have nothing in common with most white Americans. I am similar to other white Americans in terms of ideas and interests, reverse coded. I am dissimilar to the average white American. So there were 9 questions, and they collapsed, they created an aggregate variable based on those 9 questions. And the alpha reliability was quite high. So those questions, that means those questions hung together. They seem to be measuring a similar construct. So they also asked people about what they thought President Trump represents the average white American or not. I think what it means to be an American, the image I think about is very different from President Trump. I think that President Trump's values reflect the values of most white Americans. Again, they created an aggregate variable out of those 3 questions. Now, when we get to study 2 and 3, these intentions to advocate for racial equity, I definitely have some major problems with this also. So this is where I'm much more in agreement with you. So their idea was to ask people if they would take some kind of action. So when I hear people, again, this is not their scale. They borrowed this or use somebody else's scale. When I hear people telling racist jokes or using racial stereotypes, I will confront them. So that's like intent to act. We don't know if people really would or not.
I would.
Yeah. Well, we're just asking them in the study because somebody says that they will do something, in a survey.
Mean that they will do it.
Yeah. I mean, we just don't even really necessarily have that much of awareness of ourselves. We never know what we're going to do until we're in a situation. And I always object to. people who
Yeah.
tell me that they do, oh, if I were you, I would have, well, maybe you would have, and maybe you wouldn't have. So, I will educate myself about the racism and discrimination that racial minorities faced in the past by reading books and articles. I will follow news coverage and commentary about instances of prejudice, discrimination that racial minorities currently face. I will talk about racial inequality, and I will avoid, this is obviously reverse coded, I will avoid talking about racism and discrimination. Intentions to advocate. So these policy support, so like housing, universities should be able to use racial quotas. Due to history of discrimination, American society has a responsibility to create programs. So there's policy support also. And then they said behaviors was, this is in my opinion, quite a serious, well, I shouldn't say serious flaw, but they missed an opportunity. How's that? They tell people that they have $1 to spend in the study. Oh, you were such a good participant that you get a bonus $1. So people were paid $1.50 to participate in this 10 or 15-minute study. But you get a bonus $1 because you were really good. This is only in study 3, I think. And they ask people how they want to spend it. Now, they make a bit of a big deal about this in the study, but the examples, they only gave people the opportunity, and I think there's, gosh, how many are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 7 different possible places to donate, and they are all very leftist, shall we say. So NAACP, the ACLU, Poverty, Race and Research Action Council, American Indian College Fund, Asian Pacific Islander American Health Forum, the Innocence Project, and so on. So now remember, they didn't advertise for just liberals, right? So they didn't give people an opportunity. So when we get to that study, I want to say a little bit more about that. Okay. So anyway, I'll just describe. So study 1 and 1A and 1B. They manipulated group image threat by showing participants that either they were likely in agreement, supposedly, with the majority of white Americans, or they were likely in disagreement. So people were randomly assigned to condition, it was not based on their political ideology. They just were randomly assigned. And then people completed various of those scales that I mentioned. And in study 1A, there was actually a control group, and that those people did not see any of the pretend survey. Okay, that's important because in study 2, there's no difference between the experimental groups and the control group. So in study 1A, there's a control group, and there is a significant difference. Study 1B, no control group. So what did they find? They found that participants who were left-leaning, when they learned that they were essentially in the minority, okay, we don't know if that's what they thought, but we assume that what they thought was that, I am not in alignment with the majority of Americans who support some of what Trump supposedly said, that those people then subsequently disidentified supposedly with the white race, by answering those questions, I feel a distance between myself and white Americans. Those 9 questions that I read, they self-reported that they felt less connected to the white race. So this is not a pre-post, this is only post materials, okay? So there was a significant difference between groups in people's responses to those 9 questions after they had seen the experimental materials, those agreement or disagreement of the 5 questions. These are not huge effects, number one. They're relatively they're significant, but they're not huge. But they knew that, and again, they got in study 1, 478 white U.S. born non-Hispanic people, Amazon Turk participants. In study 2, just over 1,000 people. There are also some interesting situational variables involved, and they do include that, Trump being impeached. There's some other things that they cannot remove. Obviously they cannot remove the, we call them history effects from the study, right? And so it may be, in fact, that these stimuli had less effect than simply just what was going on in the US at the time, right? And that just reminding people that, you're in a study about politics may have been essentially enough, to find these slight differences. I will also say that they did this, I don't know if it's Johnson-Neyman or Johnson-Newman. It's Neyman. I assume that's Neyman technique. And in order to analyze the data. And what that does is basically find the point at which results become significant. And so no, where they start to become significant. Okay. So in study 1A, the left, you had to be much more left leaning. So remember, it was up to I think, wasn't it up to an 8? Yeah, an 8. Only people that were at a 5.2 or above, so pretty left leaning, were had started. That's where you started to see the significant results. In study 1B, which was during the Mueller investigation,
Right.
okay, you only had to be above a 2.1. So that's still pretty right leaning, right? In order for there to be an effect of the manipulation, you could be much less left and still there be an effect, which again sort of suggests that there was, environmental historical factors that were perhaps we don't know, but okay.
It would
So now
seem
you
likely, though, wouldn't it?
It does seem likely.
I mean, the entirety of the American establishment, media establishment, barring Fox News, at that time, were trying to, and still are, trying to tar Trump with absolutely everything that they could tar him with. Much of it deserved, but some of it not. So, okay. I have so many criticisms. I mean,
Yes.
to begin with, I mean, I've already articulated the lies that it begins with in the introduction. Also, did these people identify as white before they went into the survey?
Yes, they had to, because when
what
you
does that mean? They identified as white, as in they look at themselves and go, okay, my skin color means that I'm white. But
no.
What's the basis of a white identity?
I actually don't even think it's that. I wouldn't even go that far.
Okay.
When they signed up for Amazon Turk, they had to check a box. Okay.
That's not an identity.
That's it. Exactly. That's just it. They just checked a box. That's the only, that's it.
So I mean, like I'm doing a form that I've had to for employment and whatever, and I have to check my ethnicity. I check white, but I don't think that
Right.
says anything about me.
No, that's when, yeah, exactly. So I'm
what are you
agreeing with you there.
disidentifying
Yeah.
with? So
Well,
that
I
kind of
mean,
undermines the
again,
whole.
people will answer, whatever question, you give
Right.
them in the survey. So
So
yeah.
you're saying. So well, here's why I think it could even be dangerous, right? So you're saying that we get them to disidentify with a check mark.
Right.
Did they even identify with the check mark in the first place?
Right. You don't know. However,
Because I've
again,
never identified as being white. Have you?
well, you say
Hi,
that,
my
but
name is Elizabeth Spivak, and I'm white.
but you say
It's
that,
only wokies that do that, right?
but well, that's where I'm going to get to. Actually,
Okay.
that's where I'm going to get to with this. But I think that again, to some extent, maybe to get there where I just said I'm going to get there. Just like the Mueller investigation was in the air, right? So was all of the other, and I say was, it still is, right? All of the other stuff, right?
But certainly it
And
was
so,
turned up to the max then. It's
right.
really powerful now, but then it
So
was.
whether you identify as white or not to start with, is that as relevant as, again, similar to the Trump stuff and everything, is just what's the historical effect at the time, making race relevant, and then being in a study where they keep saying white, 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 right? They're not doing some kind of implicit bias. They're saying it explicitly, right? They're not trying to trick people or anything like that. But people are being at that time and still today exposed constantly. So whether we identify as, white or female or whatever, when we're alone in, whatever, I'm not sure that that's as important as whether in the study whether they were able to get people to think about being white in the study.
There's a huge. So here's like I worry that this article holds kind of a mirror to what is going on in mainstream culture, which is to inadvertently try to create a white identity, or create two white identities, in fact. One white identity would be the kind of the MAGA resistant, everything is being set up against us, which creates an in-group that never existed before, and a dangerous one, right? Because once people start forming an in-group, even if it forms for all of the best reasons, then they start to other people who are outside the in-group as a matter of course. Is that correct from a psychological point of view? I mean, it would seem.
Well, here's what fascinates me about what you just said. So it's almost as if you're saying that the researchers shouldn't study it because their studies creating something dangerous.
They can study it if they like. I'm just saying that this is what's happening in society.
Right, and that's why we should be studying it.
Yeah, but not in this way.
I'm sorry, but
no, but not in this way. Not when you start to say that kind of like you associate some of the arguments, for example, that inner cities need more policing.
But that has to do with their conclusions. That's not the way that they
the most important part of the article.
It is not. No, it is not, because we need to know how they got there. And that's so. I think that there are other things that we can draw from this. So I understand that from your standpoint that the conclusions are the most important thing. From my standpoint, the conclusions are there. Those are their opinions. I don't give a shit about their opinions. It's like that's where they get to say my study is the greatest because, right? They get to justify their study. That's their interpretation. That's their opinion. That's the only place in a research study you're supposed to give your opinion. Now, I totally agree that in the introduction, you shouldn't be giving your opinion. And in your opinion, they gave their opinion. And so I don't
disagree.
But that does not mean that that we shouldn't be researching this. In fact, maybe we should be researching it even more. If it can truly be, if an identity can be created in a few minutes of participating in a study, that's interesting to know.
But how is this paper going to be used by most people?
Look, that is not our job. That is not a research. It is not our job to. Again, that is censoring. You're saying we shouldn't do it because
I'm saying that I'm saying it is unethical to argue the data is saying something that it isn't saying. Because an undergrad, not just an undergrad, academics in general, fully tenured professors are not going to bother to read the methodology section or anything like that. They're just going to jump straight to the discussion or straight to the abstract and say, this paper makes clear, it shows this, or it makes this look likely that this is the case.
That is not the researcher's problem. It's not the journal's problem. It's not that's not the problem. And to suggest that research, that a design or, that, I mean, again, it's the, this article's only been cited twice in, by other people. And that's what the marketplace of ideas is all about. Right. So yeah, I say it's not for us. We can disagree with their conclusions. We can,
It's not just that I disagree with their conclusions. I do disagree with their conclusions, but there's just so much in there that they get wrong, like flat out wrong. So, for example, they suggest
now, is this study 1A and 1B?
Well, I mean,
or should we move on?
Well, we can stay there. I mean, I felt that they were creating a white identity. Well, in likelihood, where one didn't exist in the first place.
I think that's really interesting if they did.
Well, no, but that's what people are doing in the media, though, and that's fine. You show that a nefarious thing is happening, and you have to do the nefarious thing to an extent in order to,
Mm-hmm.
But I wish they would have talked about that instead of equity and
Yeah, no, I agree, but you know what? I don't know if they could have gotten it published if they did. And that's why I like that again. So I'm interested in this article for a whole different reason. And I just sort of like blew off some of that stuff because I'm interested in it for a different reason. So, but do you think they could have gotten it published if they said, look, we created a white identity in the span of 10 minutes? Ew.
Somewhere.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe, right?
Maybe.
But it wasn't like, we've looked at other kind of articles, right? Where other kind of articles have been, we're not talking about critical social justice, but this doesn't even seem to be it doesn't even seem to be exploring.
I think it does.
You do?
I think it does. Yeah. So, yeah.
Okay. I will tell you why it doesn't from my point of view, but you carry on.
Okay. Okay. So, in study 2, the only difference was that's when they started to ask people about their intentions to advocate. So that was the only difference. All the other manipulations are the same. And they found very similar effects. And then in study 3, they did 2 things different. One is that they also offered people to give that $1 donation. Okay, so that was their behavioral measure. And then they also hypothesized they used they were also interested in right-leaning participants' disidentification. So in study 1A, 1B, and 2, they were only interested in left-leaning people's disidentification. In study 3, they're also interested in the right-leaning people. So what they learn in study 3 is that people either like themselves or not like, are support Trump's continuation in office or don't support Trump's continuation in office. So, so now they're interested in what happens to right and left leaning people in terms of disidentification. So I do have, so study 3 materials are a little bit different. Just percentage of white Americans who support the current impeachment inquiry, either 31% or 69%. And then percentage of white Americans who support, 69% or 31%. So that's it. So it's not all those 5 items that about egalitarian, it's just impeachment, yes or no. So either you agree with most white Americans in theory or you don't. So the study 2 did find similar results. They found no difference with regard to the control group. So that, I think, they push pretty hard on the, in fact, they say, diverging from study 1A, the interaction between political ideology and predicting racial disidentification was not statistically significant. And then they go, but we tortured the data and we did find significance. Okay. So then they say, oh, there's no there with regard to control condition. And they don't say they tortured the data to find it, to do that, all that extra stuff. So study 2, I think, is weaker. They do have, how many people? They did have, they had 850 people in the study. So that wasn't a problem. But there was definitely, some massaging. They justify it, whatever, but there is definitely some data mine. They push it. I shouldn't say data mining, but they push it. They're like, oh, well, even though we're still going to do this other analysis and keep going. The other thing that was that I kind of thought that these questions about intentions to advocate, these are pretty timely. Like, these are things that I don't know how many people are going to be, how many liberals are going to be disinclined to say some of these in general. You know what I mean? Like, oh, I'm going to talk about racial inequality with people that I'm close to. I'm going to educate myself by reading books. Granted, these people are answering these questions by themselves, but this is like what people at the time were being bombarded with. You got to do this, 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 right? So anyway, I'm not, I wasn't super enamored with that part. So I found study 2 rather underwhelming. Then study 3, they did find, how many people were in study 3? I can't remember. They did find significant results with the control group and the impeachment, anti-impeachment. And again, it was around 4-ish, I think, when they, so pretty left-leaning before they found the results. And then they also found some evidence that right-leaning people also disidentified when they were exposed to the materials that said that most white Americans did not support the impeachment. So they found some evidence that that right-leaning people disidentified. Totally not impressed. Almost disbelieve their conclusion with regard to the percentage of participants who donated their money. So they, first of all, it's important to note, and they do admit this, 76% of people kept the money. They didn't donate it. So we're talking about 24% of the participants here. Okay. Granted, they have, 1,000 people or so in their study, eight or so hundred people. So it's not like, it's nobody, but they I think they overplay this, and they do admit this, but it's a serious flaw that they did not give people an opportunity to donate to,
The NRA.
exactly. So now, and the reason that I am so pissy about this is because we did this in our study where we gave people almost exactly the same thing. It's like, you have $1 to donate. And here, and we were very careful to say all of these had been vetted by a particular place, and, you can donate. And basically we said, it's not your, we can't, because you're a volunteer in our study, it's a different kind of study. But we can't actually give you this money, but we have a pool of money, and we're going to donate according to the way people vote. So we're going to donate. So in this case, people were, they did check things, okay, because they weren't giving up any money. So they did check things. But we had right-leaning, left-leaning, and importantly, what did we have? Neutral things. What did we have? We had like a pet thing. We had like save the animals. Okay. And then we had like a council for aging kind of thing.
Okay.
I can't remember these. So we had a couple of neutral things. We had some left-leaning things and some right-leaning things. And basically people just took the cop out. They did the, the pet adoption places.
Oh.
So they did not want to come down on one side or the other. And we, our manipulation had no. So, people didn't, of course they can always skip the question, but they couldn't keep the money. Okay. So people did, but they didn't choose. They didn't want to choose in our study, and we had over 400 people in our study, and they didn't want to choose. They didn't want to donate to anybody. They wanted to donate to the left or the right. They just picked the safe option. So they didn't give people those options. They only gave people the left-leaning, the extreme. They're pretty obvious left-leaning options too.
Okay, so what do you think that tells you about the authors and their intentions?
Yeah, well, I know what you think it tells. It tells.
I think I've made that clear already.
Yeah. Now, here's, well, first of all, I want to say, while the effects, again, they knew the effects would be, somewhat weak, right? They knew that this was, and they have a lot of people in the study. I looked at I did not print them out, but I looked at the correlations in the supplementary materials that weren't in the article. The correlations are quite convincing. They're not only significant, but they're strong. And so, I don't disbelieve their results, but here's why it's almost like I like this, for almost exactly the same reasons that you dislike it. Because I think that it shows, again, how perhaps because of the environment that we're in, how easy it is, just like in some of the other studies, how easy it was for people to read shame, right? In that one article where it was just like a downcast look, and people were like, you look, that seems like a normal office behavior to point out a problem on a spreadsheet, but clearly that's not what people do in this office, because that person wouldn't have been looked ashamed. So even though I think that's normal office behavior, I'm going to say that I wouldn't do that with these people, because I can tell that there's, some shame involved. How easy it was within that study to find an effect. Some of the other things too. So I think the ease with which they appear to be generating an identity that didn't really exist, or perhaps, I shouldn't say didn't, but perhaps did not exist pre, study, this is just like, the old studies, where, this is a very famous study. I'm sure you've heard of it well, there's a couple of them, but let's just do the one where they say, the blue-eyed kid, the teacher says, the blue-eyed kids are smarter than the brown-eyed kids.
The Macintosh
right?
one?
Yeah, all you have to do is just, is you create groups and people affiliate with the groups.
And they behave accordingly.
Exactly. Underestimators and overestimators, right? They did the dots. And so they just told people, oh, you're an underestimator and you're an overestimator. And then they had them play games, and people became biased towards this totally bogus, ridiculous in-group and out-group. The whole camp, the boys' camp one, right? Where they created these groups and, had them argue. And then what happens when the bus breaks down and they all have to fix the flat tire? Well, then they come together and, blah, blah, blah. So but over and over again, they created these, it's called the minimal group paradigm, right? It just doesn't take much. And so that's what fascinates me about this study. The exact thing, or one of the things that you're, sort of objecting to, is what I find fascinating. And I do think that it's related to critical social justice and cancel culture. Because if it's this easy, then what are people going to do? They're going to say, again, just like the tweet that they named the article after, I'm not like them. What am I going to do? I'm going to start a department anti-racist book club. I'm going to start a reporting procedure so that students can report on faculty members who engage in, who say something wrong or who forget my name. These are people. It's like, if you build it, maybe they'll come. And so are we, so in this climate, where we can create an identity and make it ugly, will people do things like cancel other people in order to signal their virtue? In order to say, I'm not like that. Okay. So you created a fictitious identity and then you made it ugly. And what do people do? They want to get out, right? They want to show how they're different. And so is this part of critical social justice? Is this part of whatever, like making the white women cry, like,
oh, it's that wonderful thing to do.
She puts those marks on her headboard, doesn't she? Like, oh, I made more white women cry today. So if I alienate, if I create a group and then I make it a bad group, oops, I just affiliated with a group that I don't want to be in. What can I do about that? I can show how I'm different. I can signal how I am not like all whites. So some of the things that you don't like about the article are are things that I like.
You get that from the data, but you don't get that in anything that they've argued.
No, but could they dare argue what I just did? Even if they wanted to. I have no idea if
the opposite. They argue the opposite. They seem to suggest, sorry, still a bit of a cold. They argue that all of this is useful, that this is kind of productive.
Well, yes, but they're arguing it because they agree that people should be canceled, and they agree that people yes. So they're still arguing exactly the same thing. It's just they like it. I am saying this is bad, but I think it's I think it's important to know and important to think about, and
So you're doing a bit of a Lee Jussim here, where you're kind of like going through and asking and saying, here's the introduction, here's what they argue, here's the conclusion, and the data actually argues, something completely contradictory to at least the moral tone of the argument. I have issues beyond just that.
Yeah.
And I agree with you that does seem to be what the data shows. They seem to think that this is good, right? They seem to think that racial identitarianism against whiteness, again, which they don't define, which is a
Right.
huge issue, is good.
That it will help egalitarian,
which they don't define.
Whatever movements or whatever. And I don't think I don't think they had to define it, because I think this article, when it was published, fit, also please note, by the way, that this is JPSP. I'm sorry, is it? Wait a minute. No, it's PSPB. So this is this was one of the first, this is, speaking of Lee Justin, this is one of the first organizations. So it's Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin. So this is the Society for Personality and Social Psychology. So SPSP. And they're one of the first organizations that came out and said everything that they did it for their conference first. Everything that you're presenting must have a racial justice or a social justice purpose, or you have to justify with. So when you applied to present at the conference, you had to describe how your research promoted social justice. So this, it got published in that journal. Could it have gotten published any other way, particularly in that journal?
Well, not in that journal, no.
No. And maybe not in others. And I don't know. I mean, don't forget, APS, they fired their editor, right? Who just months before, they were touting as this wonderful, diversity, social justice guy that was going to, help the journal promote these other important, areas of psychology. And then they fired his ass. So I don't know. I'm not saying, I have no idea what these authors' personal, whether they're liberals or conservatives, or what their personal ideas are.
Come on, yes, you do.
But
you have no idea. What you
I
need to say is you
definitely
can't
know.
be 100% sure.
I don't believe that they could have published it if they said some of the things that I'm saying. If they said, "Oh my God, we just showed how, why something like a training thing that, you go in and you talk about white privilege and everything is gonna, maybe get people to donate money, their time, or sign up to volunteer, or whatever it is." Like, oh shit, we just showed that people can be manipulated in that way. I just can't imagine that, even if they wanted to say that they couldn't.
They couldn't say that. But I don't think they wanted to.
Well, maybe not. But
Well, the reason I don't think that they wanted to is because they started off with lying about Trump, which is like, you don't need to lie about Trump to show how awful he is. How, like, reiterate. But then they go on with like some straw man positions against conservatism, for example, which is clear that they want to criticize something that they haven't bothered to read up on.
Yeah. And they didn't even bother to find some conservative leaning, things that people could donate to either. No. So they didn't bother to do that either, which, that would not have been hard.
And let's be clear, if we, do the whole autistic thing, like I could go through all of the paradigms and make something about, I could tick all the racial justice, social justice boxes, and then invoke black conservatism, because black conservatism is all about trying to improve things for black people. It just takes a different approach, right? So like black conservatism would, so the article says is that, conservatives are less concerned about equality and equity, and it mixes the two terms up and they don't mean the same thing. So, again, classically, equity means equality of outcomes, which is kind of desirable, but how do you get there, right? Equality, generally speaking, would mean equality of opportunity, right? And conservatives will always emphasize the former, and they will argue that you can get the only way that you can really get the latter reliably is through extraordinarily oppressive social pressure, like under the Soviet Union, for example. And I think they're probably right. And I don't agree with everything that they say, but I think on that point they're probably right. Black conservatism would hold that, for example, the structural barriers that black people face in the United States, generated by racism, are real and should be ameliorated. Nobody's saying that racism is good or anything like that. They or hasn't done damage to people. But if you hark back to the conversation we had with Wink, who is a kind of classic black conservative, he would probably argue, and Wink, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, if I'm putting words into your mouth, but he would probably argue that yes, these structural barriers exist, but they're exaggerated. And because they're exaggerated, it creates this misapprehension in young black people that the game is so stacked against them that if they try and succeed, then they're going to be the outlier. And so therefore, the impetus to actually try is greatly reduced. And that is, to a large extent, what is responsible for the gap in equity, the gap in equality of outcomes. And I think that's a fair point. But to say that black conservatives or conservatives in general are less concerned with equality is just simply not true. They're simply suggesting a different approach. Now, you could say that approach is wrong. Fair enough. Go ahead and argue it. But to say that they're less concerned with it is just simply incorrect. And to not even raise that discussion, just to dismiss it in that way it's just not on, because it's part of this kind of dehumanizing thing. Like for me, when I look at woke people who are trying to make decent arguments, I try and at least steel man their arguments before I would go on to knock them back. But they don't even bother. They just, they kind of infer, conservatives don't really care about equality. So, and again, was Trump really anti-egalitarian?
But what if, let me just propose something. What if the authors are, in fact, let's just throwing it out there. What if they are concerned about critical social justice? And what if they are concerned about wokeism? If they are, why would they study any other identity other than white identity for the purposes of investigating that as a first pass, right? So the idea that they didn't include more, I'm just throwing it out there. Is it possible that they're like, look, this is a problem, and so we're just going to focus on whites and how easy it is to manipulate?
It's possible, but I don't think it's likely. They seem to be arguing that, in a roundabout way, this is how to generate anti-white resentment within whites, and it's great. That's my reading of the paper. Is it possible that they argued something else?
Well, not that they argued something else. I'm not. Yeah.
Is it possible that they were kind of trying to imply something else?
Or just even that they, just that they were personally interested, in it, but that the article got framed this way because it could get published this way. That's what I'm just asking.
Yeah. But Occam's razor would seem
That's
to
kind of just trying.
I think you're being very, very, very charitable. Yeah, I don't think it's likely.
Yeah. Well, I'm not as interested in what their personal motivations are, what their politics are, or anything like that. I'm very interested in how easy it was to manipulate a white identity, and what that could mean. And I guess I'm saying not what that could mean according to them, but what that could mean in other ways. And I think that it's related, the degree to which somebody then would be willing to, again, sort of join in or simply conform with an opportunity to to look different, to look virtuous, whatever. I think maybe, if they had been, I would love to have given them an opportunity after the study, instead of an opportunity to donate or something like that, maybe an opportunity to tweet, an opportunity to, on their way out to sign up for something. So I don't know. How about this? Whether they would endorse free speech. So they have an option. You have to, would you censor or maybe rate a grant lower because you knew it was a conservative white, as opposed to some, what I'm saying? Like, I would like to see how easy it is to get them to do something important, not donate $1, but something actually important, cancel somebody, harm somebody in a more, I don't know.
Maybe we should write this up. Yeah. Maybe we should write this up as an ILV grant proposal.
Yeah.
I don't know. We can get participants from Amazon Turk fairly easily, right?
Yeah, but I can't get IRB approval anymore. So I don't do research at my university anymore. So I shouldn't say I could get approval, but I don't do research at my university anymore. And especially something like this would just get me killed. More piled on. Yes. So.
Fair enough.
So we'd have to get IRB approval through your university.
Oh, I could get that.
Yeah.
They wouldn't care. It's in Japan. No problem. Or we could get it from somewhere else. But
yeah.
Good. So
this is a lively discussion.
No, it is. And but you get the reason why I hate it, right?
Yeah.
And I get the reason why you quite like it, because you're like, the discussion is interesting and it generates data that supports a different conclusion to the one that they're making. And it shows that it is really easy to get people to identify not even with a group, but against a certain group.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And we already know from, for example, Macintosh, I think, we already know from a load of previous studies, a long history, that if you can get people to do that, then they are going to start acting atrociously to each other. So if you can get people to identify, and this article seems to show that you can get people to identify against whites, even white people to identify against whites, they show how easy it is to do, then we know that, even with the best of intentions from previous history, that this shows that they will behave badly.
And the fact that the authors are saying that what we think of as behaving badly is good behavior
is kind shocking.
Is kind of, yeah, it's a whole different thing.
So there would seem to be decades of research that would seem to show that the effect that they're creating is going to lead, just research history shows this, right, is going to lead to appalling behavior and appalling outcomes. It's
well, even if it's just, again, just sort of like, the really low stakes thing where, like the robber's cave kind of stuff, where, it doesn't have to be, harmful, that just people will, cheat other teams out of a little bit of money, 50 cents, and they will actually cheat themselves in order to harm the other team. So they will give themselves less if it hurts the out group. So they'll even harm themselves. And this is, I think, what this is showing. It's like, look, I'll harm my own in group, if I feel, disaffected or feel that, if I feel that there's not enough diversity in my in-group, or there's, diversity of thought, by the way, diversity of thought in my in-group, then I want to like hurry up and say, how different I am or something. So.
And my absolute shock, and the reason why I hate it, is because they seem to think that this is a good thing.
Right.
And, the evidence. And again, you're suggesting, well, is it possible that because it would be
Again, I
difficult
don't
to
really
make that
care what their
argument?
I don't really care what their motives are.
Well,
I
I
think it's,
do.
I know you do, but it's kind of irrelevant to me. And here's one of the reasons why I'm arguing with you so much on this point is because this is exactly why I got canceled, right? Because people said you wouldn't have done a study on this if you didn't believe it, right? Even though I had 4 conditions and it was, there was whatever. But this was the argument against me, right? And so I guess I'm feeling a little bit defense. I feel like I need to defend these authors and like they're allowed to do this. They're allowed.
No, I'm
to
not
do
saying that they.
so,
Look, I'm not saying that they're not allowed to do this, and I certainly wouldn't support them being cancelled. The reason why I'm reading Bad Intentions into this, and I wouldn't read Bad Intentions into your work, is because they begin with a set of lies. They seem to imply that two out of the 3 positions that they mention are anti-egalitarian, when you could make the case that both are actually egalitarian. The third one, I would agree with them, but again, there's a discussion to be said that actually having immigration controls is egalitarian because it helps lower income workers within the United States who are already there. I would disagree with that position, but you could make the case. And if you want to state that that's anti-egalitarian, I think you need to do the work. They strawman conservatism. There's no discussion on the ideological positions.
yes.
They don't discuss liberalism. And all of that's like, if you make one of those mistakes, fine. You make 2 of those mistakes, okay. But when you keep making those mistakes, and then there's another one, you've got the charities that they can donate to. And as you pointed out, there's no right-wing one or no neutral one. That's when I start to think, okay, I will give you charity only up until a certain point.
And this is exactly what people like us are, hollering about, which is that, there's a bias, this is part of the publication bias, right? Like this is, this said things that this, SPSP wanted, is what they wanted. So maybe the article in part got published because it said something that was, they thought the right thing to say. And so maybe it didn't, it wouldn't have held up maybe, 10 years ago. I don't know.
Well, I would hope so.
And so, yeah.
And hopefully it won't in 10 years' time, because basically, essentially what it seems to be saying to me is, here's how you gin up racism against white people, and that's a good thing. I mean, that's my read.
And I say, here's how you can gin up racism against white people, and holy shit.
Holy shit.
Holy shit, yes. But I don't necessarily
think they're saying it's a good thing and they're lying all the way through.
Yeah.
But you're right, holy shit, right?
Yeah.
And by the way, if you can do it against white people, you can do it against anyone else.
Yeah, right.
So long as you create the social conditions.
Exactly.
I mean, this stuff.
You can do it against blue-eyed and brown-eyed people. You can do it against, there's no end.
You can tell you who it's being done against right now: Jewish people.
Yes.
By right-wing groups and kind of critical social justice affiliated groups are ginning up racism against Jewish people. And within living memory, we know where that went, right? Within the last decade, we've seen how bad anti-Semitism has got with crimes against Jewish people. So yeah, this is absolutely...
critical social justice is not helping.
No. So this is abjectly terrifying. From a cold rejecting the arguments they make and just looking at the data, it's abjectly terrifying. And it's even more abjectly terrifying that the authors seem to think it's a good thing. And what makes it even more abjectly terrifying than that is that the journal itself and all of the authority figures and professors at the journal seem to think that this is also a good thing and are pushing it out there and presenting it in the world. Wow. And on that note,
okay.
Thank you very much for listening. We will be proceeding with more interviews and academic insanity. We may have a famous guest coming up in our next podcast. But
depends on when people are listening to this too.
It does, because we tend to mix up our podcasts when we record them and present them. So apologies for that if you're still waiting for podcasts that haven't been released yet. They will be in all due course. So thank you very much.